None? All in favor?
Member Alan Moss?
Yes, here.
Member Alfonso Carney?
Here.
Member Adam Freed?
Here.
Member Jonathan Golden?
Here.
Member Arlene Shaw? Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Excellent. So then we can proceed to the first item on our agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the prior meeting. Thank you very much.
It's great coffee.
Oh, yes, okay. Everybody have a chance to look at the item, and I need a motion to approve the adoption of the minutes. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, looks like we have unanimous approval of the first item. Okay, now we have to pass a resolution with regard to the approval of internal controls policy. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I might introduce this or talk about this.
Absolutely.
I have been requested to give a brief summary of what the Water Board does and what the staff of the Water Board does. As you know, the Water Board is responsible for setting the rates of the system, and so that they are sufficient to fund the system. And when those monies are collected, we are also responsible for allocating the funds to the various parties according to the Water Financing Authority's financing agreement. You have staff of 9 people that are assigned to you. That includes me, the treasurer, Greg Acerto, the deputy treasurer who's there, and we oversee the team that is responsible for everything from reviewing and preparing the rate proposal to accounting for the funds collected by the Bureau of Customer Services and implementing the other matters in your rate schedule, such as responding to customer appeals. Greg is our chief attorney, and in addition to his long-standing duties of drafting appeals, he is wonderful at working with our team and figuring out all kinds of things from, a payment that comes in without an account number on it, whose payment that might be, to how to work the banking systems and with their websites and other financial systems that we use. Molly Braun, who's here, is our Water Board policy analyst. She is new to the board. She assists me in preparing presentations for you.
Wait, who is it?
Molly Braun, she's been with the board, I guess, 4 months now. So relatively new, and she has also been responding to appeals, learning the rate schedule, and getting familiar with that. Kevin Kunkel, who is here, who's a long-time member of the Water Board team, helps set up these meetings for you, and also deals with upstate customers. He is a liaison between the Bureau of Water Supply and the Bureau of Customer Services for us, and corresponds with the upstate customers. You also have, it's actually an extremely sad event. Reporting directly to Greg is the Chief of Fiscal Operations. And unfortunately, that was Anthony Circolone, and he died in the past month, very suddenly of a heart attack. So I know you were all familiar with his emails at least. And so that is a very, it's been a difficult month for us overcoming that.
Do you know how old?
He was 54, so it was very sudden. And reporting to Anthony are Giovanni Dolce, who collects, or to the Chief of Fiscal Operations, I should say, is Giovanni Dolce, who collects the accounts for the money each morning and allocates the funds, as well as Greg Gass and Lily Ma, who review refund requests and dishonored payments and adjust the banking, the accounts on CIS to match the bank statements. And then there's also Jason Lowe, who reports to Greg, who responds to customer appeals. So that's your staff of the Water Board, and that's an overview of what we do. The internal controls policy that you have before you is about the day-to-day functions of how we go about those business functions.
And I just want to add that at a meeting earlier today of the Joint Audit Committee of the Water Board and the Water Finance Authority, the Audit Committee recommended that the respective boards of the Water Finance Authority and the Water Board approve the internal control policy.
If I could just back up, one of the reasons why, one of the reasons why we're interested in getting a little better understanding of the internal workings of the Water Board and the staff is that a number of boards have been criticized for not having any knowledge of what's going on, what the backstory is, and I don't want this board to be unaware of the operations and the functioning of the staff. And it would be helpful if, from time to time, you just brought us up on speed. You mentioned various activities, and if, are there metrics, and just giving us a little overview of the metrics, so that when I get a call from the Daily News, I can make intelligent noises.
Or refer those calls back to staff.
I'm going to have to learn how to do that. I lead with my chin.
I was intrigued that I left out the law department. I was just talking about the water board. The law department here, Al Rodriguez, also assists us in matters related to the board. And at the law department here downtown, Gail Rubin also assists us in litigation matters.
Well, Albert is our lawyer. And I
Well,
bring
One
my,
of your lawyers.
One of
and,
our
and I
lawyers.
bring my estate matters and I bring negligence.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was just thinking about the LaFrac staff, so sorry.
Anything further on that? All right, so then we have the internal control. Is there any change in the statement from last year to this year? Is there any?
We actually have not fully reviewed this as a board at a public meeting before. There was a draft last year that was circulated that you saw, but this is the first time this would be approved by the board. There have been minor changes since the draft you saw last year, nothing substantive that
We discussed the red line or black line version of the changes at the audit committee, and almost universally they are very technical in nature, changing names to actually reflect the positions and the processes at the water board rather than any functional or material changes. We discussed it with the auditor as well, just to get their input on whether it complies with best practices, and he also felt that it did and that there were no material changes being made and the changes being considered.
Okay. Everybody comfortable?
Yes.
A motion to approve of the internal controls policy.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, yes. This is something that is important, and I forget who asked for, one of the board members brought this up, I think, previously, and this is an opportunity for us to get a little better understanding of what's cooking north of the Bronx.
So we have our Assistant Commissioner of Water Supplies, David Warren, who will tell you.
David?
Good morning.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, it's a pleasure to be here again. It's been about 3 years since I was in front of the board, and there's some new faces, so it's nice to be back. I have a ridiculously long title for what should be a fairly brief presentation. I'm really going to cover 3 topics this morning. I'm going to update you on the status of our watershed land acquisition program. I'm going to talk about the natural gas impact assessment project that was funded by the board, and there's some recent developments at the state level on natural gas exploration in New York State. Both of those topics, I understand, were requested by the board, I believe, at the September meeting, and so I'm here to provide you an update based on that request. And then we thought, while I was here, I could give a brief update on the status of our demand management work with the upstate wholesale customers. So this is a map that I'm sure is familiar to you, but I thought it would be helpful just to start with a quick reorientation to the water supply system. This shows the water supply overview. As you know, there are 19 reservoirs and 3 controlled lakes that are part of the system. We serve 9.4 million people, which is approximately 8.4 million people here in the city, plus 1 million people north of the city. That's about half of the population of the state. And on average, we deliver about 1.1 billion gallons a day. The water comes from a 2,000 square mile watershed. Those are the areas outlined in green or highlighted in green. Unfortunately, this laser doesn't really show up very well on the screen, so you'll just have to follow along here. The watershed, or the drainage area that drains to our reservoir, is approximately 2,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of the state of Delaware. There are 3 main sections to our system. The oldest portion of the system is the Croton system. It's located east of the Hudson River in Westchester and Putnam counties. That system is going to be filtered. As you know, the filtration plant is under construction in Van Cortlandt Park and is currently undergoing startup testing, and I believe will be online sometime this calendar year. The Croton system, on average, historically has delivered about 10% of our water supply. In recent years, it's been much less than that as that system has been prepared for the bringing the filtration plant online. The larger portion of our watershed, our system, is located west of Hudson. There are 2 distinct systems, the Catskill and the Delaware, but we do essentially operate them and refer to them as a single system, the CatDel or Catskill Delaware system. Back in the late 80s, in the early 1990s, the city made a decision to pursue a waiver from the federal filtration requirement for our Catskill Delaware system, and that decision was based on the very high quality of the water that comes from that system, and also the plan that the city put forward to implement a series of programs to continue to ensure high quality water to prevent degradation of water quality in the Catskill Delaware system. There are many elements to that overall, what we call our filtration avoidance or source water protection program, and the land acquisition program, which I'm going to touch on, is one of those key elements of that program. Before we leave the map, I would just ask you to notice one thing. The aqueducts that connect the west of Hudson system do pass through our east of Hudson water supply system, and there are a couple reservoirs in the east of Hudson area that are operated as part of the Catskill Delaware system, and that will be relevant as I talk a little further about land acquisition.
May I just ask a quick
course.
question on the map, if you don't mind? Is there a reason that the reservoirs are at the periphery of the watershed?
That's a function of the way the drainage works. Essentially, the reservoirs dammed up existing rivers, and so the area that's draining into that river and flowing into the reservoir upstream is the area that's highlighted in green. And then once you get to the dam, everything below that does not drain into the reservoir. So it's basically the nature of how the dams were constructed on the reservoir, and you're collecting water that's draining into an area.
But it's not a function of the collected water not being protected on one side or both sides?
No. So you know, our source water protection program focuses in the areas that drain to the reservoir, but there's sort of a perimeter around the reservoir and around the dam that the city owns that's protected.
Thank you.
So just a quick overview of land acquisition. As I said, it's in 1997, the city initiated a land acquisition program with the goal of protecting water quality, and the strategy for doing that was by buying vacant, undeveloped land to prevent future development and prevent water quality impacts associated with that development. As I'll describe, the land was divided into priority areas to support a strategy for pursuing the most important lands for source water protection. We only buy land from willing sellers. That is, we will not use condemnation. That was a very important consideration for the communities who remember when the city came up to develop the system and build the reservoirs. At that time, condemnation was used. Communities were relocated, flooded, and there was a lot of concern in the communities that we might resort again to condemnation. So we only buy from willing sellers. We pay fair market value based on an appraisal, and we do pay taxes on all the property that we own upstate. And we manage those lands for water quality protection, and that includes forestry management, that includes a variety of other sort of ecological management strategies, and we also do allow low impact recreational uses on the lands that we own. Hunting, hiking, bird watching, fishing on the reservoirs are allowed. Things like snowmobiling and mountain biking tend not to be allowed because they have the potential for higher impacts. And today we've purchased around 134,000 acres. Today I'm going to be talking mostly about our program in the Catskill and Delaware system, where we've purchased about 134,000 acres. We've purchased an additional almost 2,000 acres in the Croton system. And as I'll show a little bit further in a moment, about 37.5% of the system is now protected.
And that's from since when?
Since '97. So let me talk a little bit about how we prioritize lands for purchase. And there are two, there's sort of two levels of prioritization, and I'll show you some maps with the first level screening, which divides the watershed into priority areas. So again, this is the east of Hudson watershed, and within the Croton portion of that watershed, there are 3 priority areas that were used to identify areas that were most important for acquisition. But what I want to highlight here is you see at the very northwest corner and at the very southern corner, these are the 2 reservoir basins that function as part of the Catskill-Delaware system. And you'll see that there's a slightly different prioritization scheme for the Catskill-Delaware system. And because of the way the aqueducts connect there and the way the water is typically routed through the system, those 2 basins, Kensico at the very south and the West Branch and Boyd's Corner Basin at the very northwest there, function as part of the Catskill-Delaware system. This is our west of Hudson watershed showing the priorities. Here there are essentially 4 different priority areas, and the first priority areas, I've got 2 categories. Priority area 1 is based on a concept that's called 60-day travel time, and that's the idea that a drop of water that falls within the watershed would reach the first customer within 60 days. Why 60 days? That was determined to be the viability in the environment of certain contaminants. At longer than 60 days, they tend to die off. And so for a public health perspective, those areas within that 60-day travel time are particularly important to protect. So the areas that you see in red and the light blue are all within that 60-day zone and are our highest priority for protection. Priority area 2 is the remainder of the basins that are potentially terminal basins. And by that we mean a basin that can be operated in a way that that's the last collection point before reaching the customer. Our west of Hudson basins are not typically operated as terminal reservoirs. Normally the water is routed through reservoirs east of Hudson, but we do have the operational flexibility to send water directly from those reservoirs into the distribution system, so they're potentially terminal reservoirs. Priority area 3 are the areas outside of the terminal basins that are have identified water quality problems based on our sampling program. And priority area 4 is all other areas. Within these areas, we further prioritize and evaluate properties based on a variety of criteria, including slope, including the presence of wetlands and watercourses and other sensitive water features. We have limitations. As I said, we can only buy vacant land. We can only pursue parcels that are 10 acres or larger. And when you put all the restrictions in of the roughly 1 million acres in our CatDel supply, about 475,000 of those acres are potentially eligible for city acquisition. So I did mention that overall we've achieved a level of protection. About 37.5% of the land in our watershed is protected. That includes land protected by the others, and within the Catskill area, there's a significant amount of state-owned land. I did bring some maps here. I know they're really not easy for you to see right now if you want to take a look at them later, but it does show the distribution of parcels that we've acquired as well as the state-owned land and give you a sense of protection. But what that 37.5% figure sort of masks is the very high levels of protection that we've achieved in some of our most critical basins. As you can see from the chart, Kensico Reservoir in central Westchester is more than 40% protected. West Branch, Ashokan, Rondout, Neversink are all at 50 or close to 50, or in some cases more than 60% protected. And if you go back to that map that I showed of the system, you would see that those are the basins that are either closest to the city or in those higher priority areas. So if you just look at the aggregate number, it's still a pretty impressive level of protection, but it hides the fact that we've achieved even higher levels of protection in some of our critical basins. You've seen a version of this. I think you saw this back at your September meeting. If the numbers are slightly different, it's, as I said, I'm only presenting Catskill, Delaware numbers today. You may have seen a version that showed that included Croton acquisitions, so the numbers would have been slightly different. But this just highlights there are essentially 3 different classes of acquisitions that the city funds. First is acquisition by New York City in fee. That is an outright acquisition of the property. We are the owner of the property and have total control over the property. That is the largest category of our acquisitions today. You can see approximately 64% of the properties are protected that way. And that is nearly 1,300 parcels that we've purchased since 1997. We also buy conservation easements. So if a landowner is unwilling to sell us the property in fee, we will pursue a conservation easement, which essentially prevents development of that property, but leaves the underlying property in the ownership of the individual. Conservation easements are beneficial in that they are less expensive for the city to purchase, but they do present management issues. We have to monitor them more closely. You still have a landowner or property owner who presumably has carved out their house, and so they're living adjacent to the property that we bought the easement on, and we have to monitor regularly to ensure that they're complying with the restrictions that are imposed in the easement. And you can see about 18% of the land purchased to date has been done through conservation easement. The third class of acquisition is called a Watershed Agricultural Council Conservation Easement, or WAC easement. We partner with the Watershed Agricultural Council on a variety of programs to work with farms in the watershed to prevent pollution impacts from watershed farms. One of the strategies is to buy conservation easements on those farms. Those easements allow the farm to continue to be used for farming purposes, but if it ever stops being used for farming purposes, it cannot be developed. So it can't be flipped over to a developer and turned into a subdivision. It's protected as an agricultural use, and the farmer is also required to have an active whole farm plan, which we work with them on to prevent polluted runoff. So that's another 18% of our acquisition totals today.
How engaged are we in looking at kind of repair, taking best practices to prevent the runoff
fertilizer and soil from getting into the watershed. Is that part of the kind of active farm plan?
The whole farm plan is exactly that. We work with the farmer to assess the farm operations. Each farm operation is different. And based on what that farmer is doing on that property, we will develop a suite of practices that are designed to prevent the polluted runoff associated with pollution, farming activities. So as you suggest, a big focus is on creating buffers around the riparian areas, keeping the cows out of the streams, if you will. Manure management is a very important aspect for us. A lot of these farmers use their manure as fertilizer to grow crops to feed their livestock, but we want to make sure that when they're spreading manure, they're doing it away from the streams and they're doing it at appropriate times of year. So there are a whole suite of, there are about 11 categories of potential polluting activities on farms, and for each of those categories there are a variety of BMPs or best management practices that can be employed to reduce the potential for impacts. And that program has been very successful. It's a voluntary program, but more than 90% of the farmers have enrolled, so we've been very pleased with the implementation of that.
90% of the farmers who are within the watershed?
Yes.
Wow.
So I did just want to highlight a few next steps for our land acquisition effort. As the program has evolved, our solicitation strategy has evolved with it. We're trying to take into account the high levels of protection that we've achieved in certain basins and shift our focus to some of those basins where we have basins in some sub-basins where we have lower levels of protection. Because of the regulatory mandate under filtration avoidance early on, we felt it was very important to demonstrate that we could run a successful land acquisition program. And so I won't say that we weren't selective, but anything that was an potentially eligible property we would pursue. I would say now we're becoming a little more selective and really going after the properties that we think are most valuable for source water protection. Typically now we won't consider properties that are smaller than 50 acres, just kind of on a per deal transaction cost, looking at those smaller properties. A 100-acre purchase or a 10-acre purchase basically takes the same amount of time. So we're trying to focus on the larger purchases right now. And we're also trying to look, if you do get a chance to look at these maps later, you'll see that we have clusters of properties, and there will be logical places where to try and fill in some of the gaps, and so we're really focusing more on filling in those gaps. Again, it's still a willing seller program, but we're employing different strategies to try and get to what we think are the most important properties. We have two new initiatives that are rolling out this year, which are going to focus on smaller pieces of property. One is a riparian buffer program. So the riparian zone, as you can see in that drawing there, is just the area immediately adjacent to the stream. And proper management of the riparian zone can be really critical to prevent polluted runoff from getting into the streams. So we're starting a pilot program to see if we can effectively protect that riparian buffer through an acquisition strategy. There's some challenges to this. Again, like our conservation easements, the ownership of these properties may present kind of a management issue for us and a monitoring issue for us. Also, those riparian zones don't tend to hold a lot of value in the property. So since we're only making offers based on a fair market appraisal, that 50 feet next to the stream is not necessarily developable, and it may not have much value, so we're not sure that landowners will find it attractive to sell us these small stretches of property at fairly low value. So, as I say, it's a pilot program. We're going to see whether this can be an effective addition to our overall strategy.
And I assume that gets you below, because you're not buying 10-acre tracts at the buffer, so.
That's right. We've worked with our acquisition requirements are regulated by New York State DEC, and we've worked with DEC to allow for an exemption within that framework to buy, in the context of this buffer program, to buy smaller properties.
Is that something that also could be done through a conservation easement, that typically, rather than the full sale?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that would potentially achieve the same protections. Yeah. The other new addition to the program that we're rolling out this year is a flood buyout program. Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee were devastating storms in the watershed in August of 2011. It really highlighted I think for us as the water supplier, but also for the communities, the potential impacts from the high flood, these high flow events. We have participated and cooperated in the past in flood buyout programs that were administered by FEMA, but for the first time we're allocating city funding and we're going to have a completely city-run flood buyout program. It's quite a shift for us because this program will allow us to buy structures which will then need to be demolished. It will allow us to buy some much smaller properties, quarter-acre, half-acre properties that may be in village centers that are in harm's way to the floodway. And it's a real shift in strategy for the program. It presents management problems as you think about, we're now going to have this patchwork of much smaller properties that we have to be keeping track of. And there also is a lot of community sensitivity. As I mentioned earlier, the communities still have lingering memories of when the system was developed and the way the city came in and condemned properties. They're worried about losing population. They're worried about losing tax base from these developed properties. So there are a host of sort of coordination and policy issues that we're navigating with the communities now, but we do expect to begin appraising properties for this program sometime later this year. So I was going to move now and talk about our the natural gas impact assessment, but before I move away from land acquisition, any other questions?
Sure. Go ahead, fine, John. You're very kind. Monitoring. Curious to hear a little bit about how you do it. How many people do you require to monitor 134 acres of acquired property? And how does it work? And how do you? And finally, where you have when you find an abuse, how do you manage that? What do you do with that?
Sure. All great questions. They're great questions because I know the answer. One of the challenges of developing a portfolio of properties has been exactly that. We now are in the business of managing property. And so we have allocated staff within my group to develop sort of policies for monitoring property, and then we coordinate within the Bureau of Water Supply within our operational group who have staff on the ground who actually do the inspections and do the property monitoring. We have about 4 people who work on the policy end of it and also on managing our recreational activities program. But within the operations staff, there are between 20 and 30 people who either full-time or part-time are allocated towards inspecting properties, working with landowners, looking for encroachments, managing encroachments. We have prioritized our properties in an inspection protocol. Some properties we inspect annually. Those are particularly the ones that are under conservation easement, again, because of the proximity with the remaining landowner and potential for encroachment. We also have looked at our portfolio properties and looked at ones that have a lot of neighbors around the perimeter. Those are the ones that are probably more prone to potential encroachments. Some properties we inspect annually, others we may not visit maybe every 3 or 4 years or potentially 5 years. And every couple of years we evaluate that protocol and see whether we think we're inspecting at the appropriate frequency for properties. The last part of your question was about encroachments, what's happened when we find problems. Obviously our first interest is to try and get voluntary compliance if we can with the neighbor or the property owner that's involved in encroachment. If necessary, we will partner with our friends in the legal office in DEP and in the law department to pursue enforcement action to try and get correction. One of the biggest issues that we see is timber encroachment. So people will come in and cut trees on our property, often for views. So some of the properties that border or near the reservoirs, they'll cut down the trees so they get a nice view of the water. And we will seek to get that property replanted if we can. It's a real challenge to do that. Sometimes you can't, even though it's clear that house up on the hill is the one that's benefiting from this view cut. If you didn't see them cutting the trees, it can be difficult to
demonstrate that they did.
Yes, exactly. So,
Wow.
but yes, managing the properties and managing potential encroachments is a big,
Thank you.
big activity for us.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm wondering, I know that we pay, the city system pays extensive taxes to the upstate communities
Yeah.
for owning property. Do the nonprofits that have acquired land that you showed in the graph, are they tax exempt as respects local property taxes, or do they also have to pay?
They typically are tax exempt. So because of their nonprofit status, when they acquire the land, it comes off the tax rolls.
And the follow-up question to that is whether we have contemplated the prospect of transferring the land with an appropriate conservation easement to nonprofits so that we don't have to pay the property taxes on an ongoing basis.
We have absolutely contemplated that. And that was a big point of discussion back in '97 with the communities and the stakeholders as the land acquisition program was being developed. The communities, and I think justifiably, said that it was important to their economic viability that these properties continue to be on the tax rolls. And they argued very strongly that the city should continue to pay property taxes, and there are actually limitations in the agreement that was developed in '97 that allowed us to do land acquisition that prevent us from transferring lands to nonprofits for the purpose of avoiding taxes. So we're prohibited from doing that based on the community concern about the revenue stream from those properties.
Are we permitted to fund nonprofits' acquisitions of those properties themselves?
We are, but there are limitations on that, and trying to take advantage of the land trusts and their skills has been a big issue over the years. A lot of the stakeholders, particularly environmental parties, have pushed us to make greater use of the land trusts. We have never found a particular niche that they can fill effectively. I mean, we ourselves have become, the largest regional land trust, if you will, in this area, and we purchased more than 1,600 properties in the last 17 years, 18 years. So, we're doing a lot of deals, and we just haven't found a value-added way to take advantage of the land trusts.
And that tax benefit is not a value add?
No, because there are restrictions that would, even if we do fund the land trust and they end up holding it, we would have to make some sort of payment in lieu of taxes on those properties.
Do we do that now for land that's owned by the nonprofits in the watershed, even if we haven't funded it's only if we fund the purchase?
Right.
Thank you.
Well, I have to tell you, I just found out recently in Connecticut, they do that. They have a regional water authority, and the water authority takes title to the watershed lands that they're acquiring, and they're free of taxes. Of course, it's a political, there's a hassle that goes with it.
So I'll turn now to the...
Oh, before we go, I just want to say that the closing picture here, the photographer is aptly named.
At the end of the presentation?
Yeah, you have a beautiful picture here.
Oh, okay. Our winter scene, we'll get to that when we get to the end. So let me just turn and talk for a minute about the natural gas impact assessment project that the Water Board funded for DEP. And this was going to be a very different presentation if I was there had been a December meeting, because the state's developments have sort of overtaken this issue, but I'll quickly try and summarize where we are. So natural gas, exploration for natural gas using a technique called high volume hydrofracking, or fracking, really came to our attention in 2008. And we quickly realized that within DEP, we didn't have the in-house expertise to effectively assess potential impacts on the water supply from this activity. So the Water Board put out a contract to hire an outside consultant to help us assess the potential impacts on the water supply, in particular on our unfiltered water supply from natural gas drilling using this fracking technique. If no one has ever said thank you, I'm here to say thank you. That was a tremendous asset to us, the ability to draw on that outside expertise. We did a multi-phase assessment. There was a rapid impact assessment to try and do a quick sort of screening level look at potential impacts, and then a more detailed assessment of some of the what seemed to be the more serious potential impacts. There are technical reports that are up on our website now that you can access if you're interested in seeing them. And because of that support, we were able to effectively make the case to the state that hydrofracking is simply not compatible with the operation of an unfiltered water supply. And we had already achieved a commitment from the state that fracking would not be allowed in the watersheds of unfiltered water supplies in New York State. That is our water supply and Syracuse. So the work that was funded by the Water Board was very, very helpful to us. Just a quick review of what fracking is. It's a technique for accessing gas that is bound up in shale formations primarily, essentially very tight rock formations. It involves a vertical component of a well that goes down into the ground until it reaches the target formation. In our case, it's the Marcellus Shale. The well then turns horizontally and sort of goes parallel through the target formation. Then the well is fracked. Fracking involves injecting large amounts of water, in some cases millions of gallons of water, under high pressure into the well, essentially to crack open the rock. And that water is mixed with chemicals. The industry will tell you that it's a very low percentage of chemicals, but 3% of 7 million gallons is still a lot of chemicals. And also sand. And what happens is the fracking process cracks the rocks and opens up fissures. The sand gets into the fissures and props open those fissures. And then when that fracking fluid is taken back out of the well, then the gas can escape from the fissures and come back up the well. There are many ways that this process can impact water quality. There are a lot of chemicals, there are a lot of truck trips, there's a lot of potential for spills. Wells that don't have proper casing can leak into the groundwater. And as I say, based on the number of potential pathways for contamination, we felt that this just wasn't really compatible with our water supply. We also had concerns about potential impacts on our infrastructure outside of the water supply. We have tunnels that are outside of the watershed. And there have been a lot of stories linking hydrofracking with seismic activity, introducing these large amounts of fluid into the ground under high pressure tends to lubricate existing faults. And so we were concerned that there might be impacts to our infrastructure. So as I said, we had secured a commitment from the state not to allow hydrofracking in our watershed. There have been a lot of controversy statewide about this activity. And the governor had asked the State Department of Health to conduct a study to look at the health impacts associated with hydrofracking. In December of last year, there was a press event, a public event, with the governor and the commissioner of DEC and the commissioner of the health department talking about the health study and the conclusions from that study. The State Department of Health concluded that there were valid concerns about potential health impacts, and essentially a lack of good data on whether those concerns really would sort of lead to potential health impacts. And so based on that uncertainty, the health department felt that it was not safe to proceed with hydrofracking in the state at this point. So based on the health department review, the Department of Environmental Conservation, who is the permitting agency for hydrofracking, has decided that they will conclude the environmental review that they have been conducting, and that they would prohibit high-volume hydrofracking or fracking in New York State. So for the time being, that effectively eliminates the possibility of hydrofracking proceeding in New York. That's a decision that may be revisited down the line, but at the time, really with the foreseeable future and using the current technology, don't see hydrofracking happening anywhere in New York.
Excuse me, you used what I think is a word of art. You said high volume
Yes.
hydrofracking.
Yes.
Is there another type of hydrofracking?
There's low volume
Ah.
hydrofracking. Yes. The distinction is a fracking that exceeds 300,000 gallons of water is considered high volume. Low volume hydrofracking is currently permitted in New York State. It currently it is undertaken in New York State. It is not an effective way to get to the natural gas in these shale formations. And so we haven't seen, there's no evidence that there's any rush to move to low volume hydrofracking, simply because it's not economical to really do so. And even when gas prices were higher, gas prices are currently pretty low as other energy is, but even when gas prices were higher, low volume hydrofracking is not an economical way to get at the gas in these shale formations. It certainly appears likely that the state's actions will be subject to litigation. We would presume that the gas companies would object. Some towns who were looking forward to, and landowners who were looking forward to the revenue stream that they saw associated with activity may object. There are a handful of towns that are talking about seceding from New York and becoming part of Pennsylvania, if Pennsylvania does allow this activity. I don't think that's very likely to happen, but they're talking about it. So certainly this will continue to be an active issue in the news, but as we say, we don't think it's going to be happening in the in New York State anytime soon. We have some funding remaining in the contract that the Water Board had let. I think we have about $85,000 left, if I remember correctly. And we had just extended that contract for a year to the end of 2015. We would like to ask that that contract remain open in case we need to call on consultant support when the state finally does issue their final documents. They're still working on their final documents to implement this decision. So we may need to call on consultant support when those documents come out to help review. So we would like to ask that that stay open until that is completed. Yes.
Thank you, Governor. First of all, both of these presentations are fantastically informative, so I really appreciate it. Quick question I had though about the ban on high volume hydrofracking in New York State, and there was a bit of a segue to it by virtue of your reference to the secession efforts. Is activity in Pennsylvania or potential activity in Connecticut in any way a concern, or is the topography such that the slopes are not don't create an issue if the runoff is going in the other direction?
There's certainly no potential impact from surface runoff. So, if there were a spill associated with a well site in Pennsylvania, just because of the drainage area that drains into our watershed, that's not a potential concern. There have been some concerns that in parts of our watershed closer to Pennsylvania, there may be associated truck traffic or vehicles that are going back and forth into, bringing chemicals to the frac sites in Pennsylvania. Treating the wastewater that comes out of these wells has long been an issue, and were a watershed wastewater treatment plant to begin to accept that wastewater, that could be a potential issue. We haven't seen any indication that any of those potential impacts are coming to pass. The activity is really confined to Pennsylvania right now, and we don't see any real spillover. There may be some just in the southern tier right across the border, but not in the watersheds that we're seeing.
And I take it there's none in Western Connecticut?
There's not that I'm aware of. The Marcellus Formation, the one that's currently targeted, pretty much ends at the Hudson River, so it extends west and southwest from the Hudson. It does not extend over east into Connecticut. There may be other target formations there that could be subject to development in the future, but not that we're aware of at this point.
Let me just, is there any tracking of the movement of the injected material through the shale formation? So that somebody that's injecting, let's say in Pennsylvania, that material, is there tracking of that material underground to see where it's going and whether it's a threat to us?
Yeah, the vast majority of the water and chemicals and sand that are injected into the well to frack it come back out of the well. And that's one of the concerns with the process, is it generates a large amount of wastewater that then needs to be handled and treated. I'm sure that there is some residual level of chemicals and water that's in the well. There's as far as I know, no effective way to track that. And because these are sort of tight shale formations, it's unlikely that fluids would sort of migrate through them beyond the fracked zone. So obviously they're going to be in that area where the cracks have been created, but it's unlikely that they'll any of the material will move beyond that.
Can any of the water that is taken out of the well be reused? It's wastewater, but can it actually be sent someplace and used in hydrofracking somewhere else?
Yes, and I was just reading an article earlier this week on fracking operations in Texas are looking at, they're making more effective reuse of the water, including cheaper, the treatment of the water has gotten better and less expensive. But they are actively looking at ways to reuse the water for additional frac jobs, because the impact on clean water aquifers and drawing the water out is one of the major concerns, especially in some of the drought-prone areas of the U.S.
Thank you.
And I want to note that the complexity, scope, and I think benefit of the land acquisition program and all of the work you guys are doing should not be understated, particularly given how well you make the presentation, how easy you make it sound. Recently worked to do an evaluation of 500 watersheds around the world for cities and water supplies. DEP New York City was one of the top 10 examples of water protection and the quality of our water, which is a very complicated process. I just want to make sure we go on the record commending you that you make it seem and sound very easy. Some of the most contentious political battles I know in New York City and state history for the land acquisition program, and the quality of it and the money that goes into it is second to none. So to thank you for that work as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So if I can, I'm going to take 1 minute here and just wrap up. It seemed like a good opportunity to update the board on our work with the upstate wholesale communities on demand management. As you know, system-wide, DEP has set a goal of a 5% reduction in demand, and that's associated with the upcoming shutdown of the Delaware Aqueduct for repairs. As you know, the Delaware Aqueduct carries 50% of the supply on a daily basis, and so preparing for that shutdown, and making sure the demand is as modest as possible is an important piece of that. You're familiar with the overall water demand management plan, and I just wanted to highlight on the last bullet here, which is really a new component for us, which is working with the upstate wholesale customers on their demand management. As you know, the city's had a very active in-city demand management program for decades now, very effective, but we're embarking on a new initiative with our upstate customers. Our customers upstate consume on average about 110 million gallons per day. That accounts for about 10% of the total consumption for the system. And their consumption is somewhat different. These tend to be more suburban areas. What we see is that if you look at the trend through the year on a per capita basis, the upstate communities tend to be lower than city consumption during the winter months. And then as you go into the summer, per capita consumption upstate goes above in-city consumption, which we think is watering lawns, filling swimming pools, that kind of activity. And then it comes back down as you go into the fall below per capita in-city. So there's a different usage pattern upstate, and we think that warrants sort of a different strategy or a different look at potential demand reductions. So again, upstate, we're targeting a 5% reduction from our FY13 baseline by fiscal year 2019. We're starting by looking at our 10 largest customers who account for 89% of the consumption upstate. Obviously, that's where the biggest potential reduction is. And phase one is we're offering them planning assistance through the Water Board contract to help them develop a demand management plan. So far, 5 of those 10 communities have signed on to take advantage of that offer to develop a demand management plan. And then 2 of them have actually submitted plans to date that are currently being reviewed by DEP, and we're coordinating very closely with the in-city folks at DEP who work on demand management and have a lot of skill and expertise in this area. And we're currently pursuing discussions with the other 5 communities to see if we can get them on board with this offer of planning assistance. And then depending on what comes out of those plans, we will be looking potentially to offer assistance on the implementation if we think there are effective, cost-effective demand reduction methods that are identified. So that's a very quick update, but it seemed like a good opportunity just to bring up to speed since I was going to be here today anyways.
Is on the repair of the aqueduct under the Hudson, is the 5% reduction in consumption enough to allow us to take that offline? Because you said 50% of the, I think you said 50% of the water goes through that.
It's part of a package of supply augmentation and demand reduction that we think will be sufficient to get through the shutdown. Importantly, the construction folks within DEP have been looking to ensure that that shutdown is as short as possible. But we have a number of different strategies, including demand reduction, but maximizing the Croton system. Now that the Croton filter plant will be online and we'll be able to draw a full 290 million gallons a day from the Croton system. We've upgraded pump stations that will actually allow us to draw more than 290 million gallons a day out of the Croton system by introducing that water into the Delaware Aqueduct downstream of where the repair is going to be. So we're really maximizing Croton. We have a project underway to clean the Catskill Aqueduct that will restore some capacity. Historically, we were able to get about 636 million gallons per day through that tunnel. Through biofilm growth that's on the tunnel, it's created friction that slows down the flow, and right now we can only get about 590 million gallons a day through that tunnel. So we'll be looking to clean that tunnel so we can restore that capacity. And there are a couple other initiatives that we're working on. So 5% off of 110 million gallons by itself isn't going to do us, isn't going to get us there. But as part of the overall package, it's just one of the strategies. And there's our picture by Mr. Freeze. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your help.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
One last comment. I really like your tie.
It does seem to be the order of the day here.
I dissent.
Thank you very much.
There's always one.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve?
So, good morning, Mr. Chair and members. And so, you may recall at our June meeting, it was the last appearance at a water board meeting of our soon-to-be retired Deputy Commissioner of Customer Services, Joe Singleton. We searched and found a replacement, and I'd like to introduce to the board Nancy Seinflone, who has been serving as Deputy Commissioner for Customer Services for 1 month and 1 day. Nancy comes to us after a 33-year career at National Grid and its predecessors, Keyspan Energy, and for those of us who have lived in Brooklyn long enough, Brooklyn Union Gas. And for those of us who have lived in Brooklyn long enough, the thing I remember most about Brooklyn Union Gas was of my many, many creditors, they were the only one that supplied postage paid envelopes
That's
for
right.
bill payment.
Though you really paid for it, but you didn't know. That was
I remember it because it was a bug.
Oh, that was good branding.
So I just wanted the board to have a chance to meet Nancy and turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you. I'm very excited to join the team at DEP and to help provide our customers an outstanding experience. I think one thing I'll be bringing to the table, in the 33 years I was heavily involved in regulatory work, interpreting rules, regulations, writing tariffs, putting them in plain speak for customers, and things of that nature. But also in the last few years, taking that big utility mindset and changing it around to say they're not ratepayers, they're customers. And when looking at a process, not from the inside out, I engineered it so well, but when you engineered it that well, what did you do to the customer? Did you torture them at the end? Are they making 3 phone calls? Should they only make 1? So it's great what I've seen in DEP. I think it's very customer focused, and to continue, it's not ratepayer, it's not customer service, it's customer. And how do we provide and give better things to them?
Good luck.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. You know, it reminds me, I'm sorry, this is for Mateo, actually. Could you give us an updated list of folks in DEP and, you know?
Organization.
Yeah, and all,
Sure.
yeah, that's.
There have been many changes since in the past.
Yes, I
So-
understand that you've made a very interesting and exciting change.
Oh, thank you.
I don't.
Will that be on the org chart?
It's on someone's org chart.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Alan, thank
So,
you. Alan, thank you, that's a great idea.
Oh,
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, I'm very excited.
you're making a mistake, we're gonna give you a lot of business.
Anybody
We give you
can call.
business.
Doesn't mean I'm picking up.
We're customers as well.
Thanks very much.
all right. And then we know-
Yes.
So, thanks, Dave. So, good morning.
Good morning, sir, good morning.
Collections have been good. This year, so far, we're 2.7% ahead of plan. This is our last collection day in February, and so if we collect 8 million today, we'll be on plan. We won't know whether we collected 8 million or not until about noon. So, again, just the month-by-month collections over the last 3 years. This is the percentage that we've been above or below plan at this time of year. And as you see on the right, this year, again, we're 2.7% above plan. And this is the 5th consecutive year that we've been above plan at this time of year. It wasn't always the case. And if you look at the turnaround from being nearly 6% below plan to 3% above plan, it coincides pretty much with the implementation of automated meter reading, as well as having had several years' experience of water-only lien sales, which we'll get into in a moment. Dave talked about water consumption and in-city distribution, the flow of water leaving Hillview Reservoir is about 2% below last year at this time. Again, an overall downward trend over the last 3 years. And same customer sales, where we looked at our metered customers. This is a more precise way of tracking water consumption. It's down 1.3% below last year. And you may recall that when we were setting our rates for this year, our assumption about consumption was that it was going to be about 1.5% lower. So we're right in that zone of where we predicted. This is new information for the board. And just going back to what Dave, who's no longer here, was presenting. Upstate distribution, upstate, as Dave was saying, shows a much more pronounced seasonal pattern than in-city. In-city, while there is some rise in consumption in the summer months, it is more pronounced upstate. And this shows upstate demand as a percentage of our total system. Dave was saying it hovers around 10% of our total water consumption, and indeed it does, but it goes up as high as almost 12% in the warm weather months. Estimated bills, again, they, due to automated meter reading, continue to hover around 3%. Before automated meter reading, they were 17%, and so that is an 82% decrease in the number of estimated bills. The other thing I'd like to call your attention to is the progress we've been making in Manhattan. Manhattan as a borough had been lagging behind the other boroughs because Manhattan, more than the other boroughs, has large buildings with large meters. Those are much more complicated to replace, and we've been in partnership with Veolia as part of the OPEX program, as well as the program that we had initiated before Veolia's involvement, have been on an aggressive, targeted large meter replacement program. And as we replace the large meters, we're automating the reading of them through installation of AMR. And so the Manhattan percentage of estimated reads continues to drop, and as we complete our large meter replacement program, we should see Manhattan being competitive with the other boroughs. Lien sale. We were fortunate enough to have the City Council approve lien sale legislation extending water-only lien sales as well as property tax lien sales for 2 more years. So the lien sale authority goes through December 31st of 2016. That authorizes us to conduct 2 more fiscal years of lien sales, one this year and one next year. Even before and the mayor signed that into law on February 5th, even before the City Council approved the lien sale, in anticipation of the law being approved, we sent pre-lien sale advisory letters, warning letters, to our seriously delinquent customers. And we also, once the lien sale was authorized, sent 90-day notice. We sent letters to our customers, as well as we, along with the City Finance Department, publishing the lien sale list as an insert in several newspapers in the New York area. we will continue to mail out 60-day, 30-day, and finally 10-day notices. And the last day to escape the lien sale is May 15th. And you can see on this table that the number of customers who received a 90-day notice, 18,709, is higher than last year, about 15% higher. The total amount that they owe is about 14%. So more customers are delinquent, but each of them owes a slightly lower amount than yesterday.
Does the legislation provide that the lien sales are meant to occur once during the year, or is that just how we organize it to make it the most efficient?
I don't think it is specific in the legislation that's limited to once a year, but the effort involved in conducting the lien sale and doing the massive amount of data cleaning that's necessary to ensure that the 18,000 customers that is an accurate set of customers who are seriously delinquent and lien sale eligible. As a practical matter, it occurs once a year. The only time that we have had more than one lien sale per year was when the City Council last renewed the lien sale legislation in 2011, and they renewed it late enough in the year, later than they did this year, so that as a practical and logistical matter, whereas the lien sale date has traditionally been around May 15th, in 2011 we had an August, mid-August lien sale, which was in fiscal year 2012, and then we had our normal May lien sale, so we had 2 lien sales in one fiscal year. Payment agreements, which go hand in hand with lien sales or avoiding lien sales. And by the way, once the lien sale legislation was passed, we met with City Council staff. We are organizing, together with the City Council, a number of outreach sessions. We encourage the City Council to let their constituents know that they can come in and sign a payment agreement, and by doing so, avoid having their liens sold. Currently, we have 30,000 customers who are in payment agreements. You've seen this chart before. It is substantially the same as when you last saw it. Of the 30,000 customers, fully 50% of them have subscribed to the longest payment period offered, which is 10 years. And hand in hand with wanting to extend the payments over a long time is wanting to make as small a down payment as possible. The lien sale legislation that was passed in 2011 allowed customers to enter a payment agreement with as little as no down payment. And you can see for those on the top row of the chart who have chosen to repay a shorter period of time, on average they're paying a much higher percentage down payment. Before I move off the lien sale and payment agreements, I just want to mention that the terms and conditions that the City Council approved for the next 2 years' lien sales are substantially the same as they were from 2011 through 2014. The major addition is that the legislation establishes a task force with equal members of the administration and the City Council to work together to basically find areas of potential improvement for the next time lien sale legislation is authorized, to give us lien sale authority that goes beyond 2016. That task force, by law is scheduled to convene, I believe no later than July of this year.
Steve, question.
Yes, sir.
If 66% of the 30,000 plus payment agreements are in good standing, it means that 34% are not. What do we do? How do we manage that?
Right, and so we remind them frequently. One of the features of the legislation that was passed in 2011 was that if you default on a payment agreement, if you default on a payment agreement, you become eligible for the lien sale unless you're a single-family home, because again, single-family homes are not subject to the lien sale at all. But if you default on a payment agreement, you're not eligible to enter into another payment agreement for 5 years. Before that restriction was put in place, we had a number of customers who would default on payment agreements and then would seek to have another one. So they would not comply with their payment agreement, but while they were in the payment agreement, they escaped the lien sale, and then when they then became eligible for the next lien sale, they sought to have another payment agreement. This 34% default rate it's similar between us and the finance department for those who are in payment agreement on their property taxes.
Got it.
It's traditionally hovered around between 30 and 40%.
And is there any correlation between the term of the term for the payment that the customer chooses and dropping into poor standing?
Well, unlike Dave Warren, I'm going to say that's an excellent question, but I don't have an answer to it.
I mean, I was just
curious. That's a very good question, and we'll look into that and get back to you.
And has the trend, half of the total agreements are in the 10-year duration with the minimal amount down. Is that a trend that we've seen, that most of the payment agreements tend to be on the longer side? Is there an effort or a benefit to try to get?
Yeah, I mean, when we meet with people who seek to enter into a payment agreement, we show them a calculation that says, if you choose this repayment period, you'll be paying so much. It's like mortgage payment.
Sure.
We show them what their total payments would be, how much interest they'll be paying. We try to steer them towards shorter periods. We think that's for their own benefit.
The choice is theirs, though.
It's
they
theirs.
can choose up to 10 years, and
yeah,
we counsel them on the benefits or not, but it's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And recently you've seen on your own credit card bills the I guess it's now a mandatory advisory that if you pay only the minimum payment, it'll take you 88 years to pay off this balance, and if you pay something higher, it takes a short period of time, or you pay lower interest. So we try to have that same conversation with our customers who are about to enter into agreements. Yes.
I have two quick questions. They may be highly technical, so if you need to defer on the answer, that's fine. One is, are water charges dischargeable in bankruptcy for folks who file?
The water always remains a lien on the property. So even if the customer goes into bankruptcy,
There's a lien on the property.
the lien remains on the property forever,
Right.
just like a property tax lien.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had is, you mentioned that single-family homes are exempt from the lien sale process. What is the ultimate recourse in that situation?
Right. So we, and this was before your time on the board, we went through several years of shutting off water for delinquent customers, which is very expensive to do. And because shutting off water, unlike most other cities in the United States, and with the exception of Southeast Queens, which was part of the old Jamaica water system, New York City doesn't have curb-mounted shut-off valves. And so it took approximately $5,000 to shut off water and then ultimately restore it. And because of that expense, when we were shutting off customers, we were yielding only about 21 cents on the dollar. In other words, 79 cents of every dollar we collected through shutting off the water was going to the cost of shutting off the water. We began a contract this year with, the firm is MSB, and with all the acronyms in DEP, I forget what it stands for, if anyone would, okay. Municipal Services Bureau or something like that. It is, so we engage them to pursue our seriously delinquent single-family customers through a series of letters, calls, and ultimately credit reporting. And this is the first time that we have done credit blemishing on our customers.
Wow.
It takes a pretty high standard to, data management standard to blemish the credit. And so that is our ultimate enforcement for single-family homes. Of course, customers whose personal financial situations make them that delinquent on their water bill, sometimes the threat of blemishing your credit is not, it
Too late for that.
doesn't have the impact on them that it might have on someone else.
Thank you.
So again, as we've been reporting, that consistent with the 97% saturation of automated meter reading, we have seen our initial building disputes decline over the years, and we've seen the number of final appeals to the water board declining. And as we look at the experience so far this year, we are projecting that when we end the fiscal year, we will be lower in initial complaints and final appeals than we were last year. And again, just final appeals to the water board generally trending down, as well as the percentage of appeals that were granted declining from 2013 to now. Online enrollment for My DEP account, and for those who are enrolled online, and they're automatically enrolled in automated leak notification, which has been another benefit of the technology that we've been mining from the automated meter reading system, is that since we began automated leak notification, we've notified 72,000 customers, and we estimate that they have collectively saved about $60 million. January customer collections, I'm going to go through this line by line, not really, but just the pie chart shows for those who pay online, how they break out into the one-time enrollment, the quick pay, which doesn't require you to enroll, and automatically debiting their checking account. The one salient point in the table is that, and Mathiel, correct me if I'm wrong, that for the first time, payments to the lockbox, that is the traditional mailing of a check is below 50%.
Part of that was due to the shutdown of the Staten Island facility on the day of the snowstorm, when everyone was told to go home from work and get off the streets. So that's part of the reason for that. Also, this is the first, we rolled out the new Citibank lockbox processing on December 3rd of last year, of 2013. So this is a full year after that implementation. And so you can see that the web-based payments are up 22% year over year. We've really, it's been a great system, and we're continuing to still clean up things behind the scenes, but it's been great.
The Service Line Protection Program, January, we observed its 2-year anniversary. We began rolling it out January 2013. We currently have almost 176,000 customers, which is much more than our provider, American Water Resources, had projected we would be at this point in time based on their experience in other cities. And as you can see, the vast majority of the customers have enrolled in both the water service line and the sewer service line program. And as you can see, Queens has the largest number of customers, followed by Brooklyn. So it's not correlating exactly with the population.
But it is with the percent of eligible enrolled. So they're all between, except for Manhattan, it's between 25 and 29% of the eligible population in each borough that's enrolled.
And we had a total of 469 claims in January, the biggest single activity being sewer line cleaning. And you can see what the rest of it brings out. The sewer line repair, which is a structural repair to the sewer as opposed to cleaning it. And water line repair or water line full line replacement, under our regulations and health regulations, that if the water service line is lead, then, and if it needs repair, we need to replace the entire service line. We denied some claims, and this is pretty typical of how it breaks out into why they're denied. The biggest single piece is someone wanting coverage for a plumbing issue in the house. It's simply not covered. We're very clear on that. It's the service line from the building line of the house to its connection to the city water main or the city sewer main. And again, despite our marketing and our vendors marketing to the customers, we still have a high percentage of customers who misunderstand the program, and when they have an issue with their service line, they call their own plumber and make the repairs, and then they expect to get reimbursed by the program, instead of calling the vendor directly and asking the vendor's plumbing subcontractors to make the repair. And still a fairly high percentage make a call, but there's no issue found once the plumbers arrive. And we have had, in this month, 485 policies canceled, which is a fraction of a percent of the total enrollment. We will automatically cancel the policy if the customer is delinquent in their water bill payments. And the next biggest reason is that the customer moves to another address. That's it.
That was it.
Surprise. Sorry, I hope for a gentler ending. So I just want to remind the board and the members of the public that our next meeting is planned for exactly 4 weeks from today, March 27th. At that time, DEP will be proposing a rate for fiscal year 2016 to the Water Board. And then beginning in late April.
April
we-
27th.
I'm sorry?
April 27th?
Thank you. We will conduct, the Water Board will conduct public hearings, one in each borough, and we'll hear from the public. And the rate increase that DEP is going to be proposing is going to be announced at the next meeting.
Well done.
Well, that's a good way to, that's a wrap-up line, isn't it? I just, before we adjourn, I just want to thank members of the board, Mr. Carney, Mr. Lee, Mr. Golden. I want to thank you very, very much for coming out today. It is clear that we could not get by without your participation. It's much appreciated, and what can I say?
Well,
Thank you, Mr.
thank
Chairman.
Well done.
Very nice. But Alan,
Much appreciated.
you should also, this is a terrific meeting. Terrific meeting. Thank you for presiding.
Oh, on that high note, motion to adjourn?
So, second.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you.